Kia ora everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Renee. Welcome if you're new here. If you are returning, hi, so lovely to have you. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in February. Bit of a rough month for me, not gonna lie. There was a lot for me to have to process this month and it has been hard. Yeah, it's been a very emotional month. Really surprised that I managed to read anything, but we did. I read 8 books and I DNF'd 1, which I am going to talk about really quickly because I want to. Anyway, let's talk about some books, talk about some things that I read this month. Starting with The Undocumented Americans by Karla, Cornejo, Villavicencio. No, it's just saying hello to the neighbours. This is a non-fiction weaved with a lot of the author's own personal memoir and life experience. She is an undocumented American who is graduated from Harvard, I believe through the DREAM program, and so she is kind of like this symbol of the positive kind of stereotypical immigrant that America wants to portray and paint, whereas in this collection of stories that she's telling, she is true life stories. She is choosing to focus on the undocumented Americans that America doesn't like to use an example of. They're the ones that are the crisis workers and the cleanup workers. They're the ones who helped recover bodies at Ground Zero during 9/11, and the ones that are most vulnerable in places like Flint, Michigan, where the water was poisoned and they were some of the last people to find out that this was happening. So she really tries to shine a light on these people and their communities by telling their stories, and the way that she cannot help but become involved in these people's lives, I think, is really touching and just something that I can imagine would be extremely hard to do. Would be, from a journalistic point of view, try to keep yourself distant from these people that you're talking to, the things that they're sharing, their lives that they're sharing with you. Yeah, it's a really beautiful book. It definitely feels like something that a lot of people should read, especially if you're American and you are probably unaware of the number of people that you encounter every day who are immigrants, and the work that they do and the way that they're treated and mistreated and taken advantage of. And I'm really glad that I opened the month with this one. It's definitely something that gave me a lot to think about, and that's something that I think that I would very easily go back to. So yeah, great first start to the month. Okay, I'm editing this wrap up and I realised that I completely missed a book. The second book that I read in February was actually an audiobook, and that's why I forgot it. It's called Here for a Good Time by Chris Parker. Chris Parker's a New Zealand comedian. I first discovered him during lockdown. He was making little felt figurines and posting them on his stories. It was just nice kind of wholesome content that was a good distraction during lockdown. He posts a lot of kind of funny videos about New Zealanders and kind of the typical responses they have to certain things, and yeah, he's quite a good a little just fun, lighthearted person to follow on the internet. This is his memoir. I wasn't going into this expecting amazing things. I'm pretty skeptical of like anyone that writes a book that isn't a writer. There was definitely a lot of repetitiveness and stuff like that, which I don't appreciate in writing. I think it could have been edited better, but it was a nice, easy listen just for like a few days, and I enjoyed the familiarity of it. He is the same age as me, so we're going to grow up with a lot of the same quintessential Kiwi things, and so hearing him kind of talk about his favourite biscuits and how he likes to eat them was like, you know, it's lighthearted stuff that you don't expect great things from, but it was a nice, distracting listen. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Okay, bye. Next I read The Wall by Marlen Haushofer. I read this as a buddy read with my friend Sophie. This is a story about a woman who travels to a hunting lodge with some family friends that she has, and one evening, separated from them, and a wall is erected in the night, and she soon discovers that she is the only person left alive, that everyone else on the other side of the wall has frozen in time. She's left with a dog. She soon discovers a cow and some kittens, and really this is the story of her kind of journey of survival. It's written in these it's written as a report for what has happened to her over the past 2 years of the wall being erected, and a lot of it is about her kind of mundane, everyday activities in order to survive, keep herself alive, and the animals that she has there as companions as well. It's a story about solitude and being alone. It has a lot of feminist ideals about what is expected of women and the kind of natural, innate caretaking roles that they take up. It's the idea of women being able to start again without any societal pressures to be a certain way, to have a certain job, to be a certain type of mother. This idea of being completely liberated of all those things and free to, I guess, start again. I think much of the story is the narrator, who is unnamed, kind of realizing that as we get to the end, and I was kind of wanting to know what would happen next with her. It's a very slow book. I think a lot of the mundane, repetitive nature of it started to kind of drain me and gnaw at me a bit, but I had some really good conversations actually with my friend Jessica about this book, and I think that conversation helped me to learn to appreciate this book a lot more and see what it was doing kind of between the lines. And upon reflection and the ending and kind of all the questions that were raised while I was reading it and afterwards, I did really enjoy this book. I just think the pacing and my reading experience of it made me think I didn't enjoy it while I was reading it. But there's a lot in this book that I think is worth thinking about and discussing with other people. This would be a really good book club book, I think. I really did enjoy this one, and although it was really slow, I think if you go into that with that knowledge and just take your time with it, it feels like something that you want to read really quickly, but I would say take your time with it. Next, I read 3 books that I talked about in a vlog, so I'm not going to go over them too much. One of them was Simple Passion by Ernaux. This is a memoir about, a very short memoir about the 2-year affair that she had with a married man. but it's more about the feelings, the emotions, the obsession, the way that this entanglement, I don't know why that's the first word that came to my mind, with this man changed her. The way that it kind of altered her thinking and her behavior, and the way that she looks back on it now and writes about it with a very non-judgmental, caring towards herself lens. I think that Ernaux does a really good job of centering herself in these stories, for one, and talking about her real human responses, emotions, no matter how raw or honest or ugly they are, in a way that you can't help but offer your own sympathy or your own understanding to her as a person and to those actions. It's a very sympathetic read, and I liked that even though it was about this affair, there was no centering of the man in the story. It wasn't really anything to do with him and his kind of involvement all that much, which I really enjoyed, and is definitely worth a read. Like, I loved this book and read it in one sitting while the country was being ravaged by a storm, so that seemed kind of fitting in a way. There's a lot of chaos in this book, and I think the turmoil of what was going on outside was very well fitted. Next I read Yes, Yes, More, More by Anna Wood. This is a collection of short stories. The vlog that I talked about these books in was a vlog about love. You can go watch that if you like. I did it kind of over Valentine's Day week and wanted to read stories about different types of love stories. And this one was recommended to me from my friend Alina on Instagram. She also has a YouTube channel. I'll link it below if you want to go watch that. She's very smart and very funny. But yeah, this is a short story collection that the short stories are interconnected actually, and they have a narrator at the heart of each of them. This narrator we met at different points in her life. They all seem to be these quite transitional periods where she is thinking through a lot of things. They're very joyous moments. There's no real sense of heaviness to these stories, even though some of them, the subject might appear heavy. It definitely feels like coming of age, but at different points in a person's life, all told in non-chronological order. So you're kind of just being dropped into these different parts of her life where she is having this fun kind of experience and memory, and those are drawn forward through the use of music and that kind of nostalgic feeling that you get when you hear a song that reminds you of that time in intermediate when you were really obsessed with that one boy. They just are full of hope, and there's a lot of joy to them, which was different for me for reading. I definitely tend to like heavier, sadder things that don't really have happy endings, but it was nice to read something that offered just a lighter, more hopeful story to it. Well, it wasn't like my favorite. I did appreciate it for that, and I think that this is like a really fun, easy, breezy kind of collection to hear with something that might be a little bit heavy and dark. This one, Postcolonial Love Poem by Natalie, Diaz, was the other book that I was reading in that vlog. I didn't finish it in that vlog, but I have finished it now. Like I said in the vlog, like a lot of it was clicking, some of it wasn't, and that's okay. Like, I realised that although Natalie Diaz is an Indigenous person, and so am I, not a lot of the same, our experiences aren't going to be the exact same. Our connection to our indigenousness, I don't know, is not going to be the same. But there were a lot of things that I did connect to, particularly the poem, The First Water is a Body, I think is what it was called. The First Water is the Body. We had been having a lot of these floods. Rivers had kind of burst throughout my haukanga, throughout my hometown, and it was a very grounding poem to read during that time while all of that was happening. The only thing that has made sense to me this year is being described as a river and having that kind of flow through me. And I can't explain how or why, but it just is. These poems, though, in particular, are about her representing her heritage, her people. It's about storytelling and sharing those stories and not wanting those things to be lost. It's about celebrating. I think what this collection reminded me is that Indigenous people don't need Western cultures to understand or even accept their practices, their histories, their beliefs in order to exist. We do that happily, freely, without their interference, and this kind of depicts that in a really beautiful way that I think also highlights, celebrates, describes a lot of the beautiful practices of the Indigenous people and Diaz's community. Yeah, it was just a great reminder as a Māori person that what we do doesn't need to be validated by others. That makes me feel like I can stand prouder in who I am and what we do, and that felt really good to read, and just like another reaffirming kind of statement and collection of poetry for me personally. Okay, next I read Close to the Knives by David Wojnarowicz. I read this book for book club, which we haven't had the discussion for yet. We are having it tomorrow. I'm really interested to see what everyone else thought of this. David Wojnarowicz was an artist, a writer, photographer, activist who lived through a lot of the AIDS epidemic in America. He was very political about it and wanted to, I guess, break down a lot of the stigmatism around it. He himself had HIV and is what he died from eventually, and wanted to be able to just break down a lot of those stereotypes that surround it, especially when it comes to the queer community, which he was a big part of. This is his memoir. It was heavy, it was beautiful, so much stunning writing in this. Definitely did not do this justice. I didn't get this book until last week, and I tried to fit it in before the end of February because I wanted to kind of keep it in that month and talk about it in this video. Definitely not what I would recommend doing. Like, take your time with this book. It is heavy, it's a lot. There are some hugely graphic descriptions of just about every kind of act you can imagine. Rape, suicide, murder, all the content warnings in this one. Definitely do not read if you are in a fragile moment, but so important. It taught me so much. It kind of baffles my mind to think that a lot of the policies in America are built around trying to preserve religious beliefs and morality and ignore human life. It makes me angry. I don't know if that's changed. This was written in the 90s. I'm sure it hasn't in a lot of ways. Grateful that we have medicines to help people with HIV live happy and fulfilling lives now. I am not sure if a lot of that stigmatism around HIV and those that have it and those that contract it is still there. I think there's definitely more knowledge being shared around those things, and that we all know that queer people aren't the only people that contract HIV, and that it's something that can be shared and contracted in other ways. So yeah, I think there has been some change, but I still know that in a lot of on a lot of political levels there probably haven't, and that's really sad. I'm really happy that I read this. It's definitely not a book that I would have picked up on my own. Thanks to Katie for always pushing us outside our comfort zones in our book club. Last book I read in February was The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This is a Japanese translated fiction. I've read Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. I liked it, I didn't love it, and this one even less so. I thought this book was very quiet and slow, and in the end was kind of like, I don't understand, like, what was the point of this book? It follows a housekeeper who is sent to work in the home of a mathematician professor who has some years before had a terrible car accident where he was left with memory loss. So his memory only lasts for 80 minutes, and then after that it's kind of wiped. And so a lot of his understanding of the world is done through his knowledge for maths and his love for numbers. He's definitely a person that only kind of really knows how to communicate or relate to people through that. The housekeeper has a son who the professor becomes kind of infatuated with and wants the housekeeper to start bringing him to work so that he's not alone. And from there, this beautiful kind of relationship starts to bond between the three of them, and we see the professor change as a person through the housekeeper's son. Like I said, it was a very slow book, and in the end I didn't really know what the whole point of it was. I know that there doesn't have to be a point of the book, but it just had way too much mathematics for my liking. You're never going to be able to tug at my heartstrings with maths. I just don't look at numbers or the discovery of equations and answers in a romantic way. I definitely was kind of left a bit just underwhelmed by this book, and probably won't read any more of Yoko Ogawa's work. I think the two that I've read so far confirm that it's just not my bag. You're probably wondering why I read this book. Well, I also had this book on my menu of books to read in February, which is The Lesser Bohemians by Eimear McBride. I actually DNF this book because the writing is pretty intense. It's very poetic, it's very hard to understand what's going on. I read about 50 pages and then I thought, I can't do this. It's about a young girl, an Irish girl, who travels to London to attend an art school, and there she kind of falls in love with an older teacher, and the story goes from there. These two books I actually was planning to do a reading vlog on, which failed miserably because I didn't, one, enjoy this one, and two, couldn't read this one. So I wanted to mention it quickly in here. I was going to do a reading vlog on these two books because an AI bot recommended these two books for me. So I did the thing with the chat GPT, I asked it for some prompts. I wanted a book that had a child narrator. This is the prompt that I asked it for. Child narrator, it was under 200 pages, which this one was, that had beautiful writing. You know, those were kind of my parameters. This popped up. I'd never been interested to read it, but I was kind of like, oh, I know that book, so I ordered it. Very disappointed. This book, I asked for a book that was a romance story, because, you know, I don't normally read romance, and I wanted to try something new, but I was like, okay, a different kind of love story is the prompt that I gave the chat GPT bot. And I also said again, like, I want good writing, I wanted it to be under 200 pages, which this one is actually 300, so it failed there as well. And this one popped up and I was like, oh, I've never heard of this, but I know Eimear McBride. I have a couple of her books. And yeah, I just started reading it and was like, you know what, after reading this and not enjoying it, I didn't want to do it to myself again, so I DNF'd this book. And that vlog will never see the light of day because I think I recorded like 3 clips for it, so there's nothing to even salvage to show you, but I wanted to let you know that that was kind of what I planned for these and why I tried to read these books. I guess the moral of the story for me is don't trust a robot to recommend you books. It doesn't work unless you spend all day like really honing your prompts and getting like hyper specific. I don't think it's a thing to rely on. Quite happy getting my recommendations from real humans of the internet, and that's about it. Okay, pretty happy with everything that I read this month, even though it wasn't as much as the month before. I feel good knowing that I've read some good quality stuff this intense emotional month. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. What did you read this month? What book did you read that made you feel good inside this month? That's what I want to know. I love you all. Hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Haere rā!